Liminal Light, a show that explores earth and sky and the spirits that reside there through art, literature, magic, culture, and creative action. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Okay, hello. I am Chris Rapucci. You might remember me from previous episodes. And who are you?
I'm Elodie Saint-Onge-Aubu.
We are going to try something different today that I think we're going to keep doing every, you could call it a month, but really what we're tracking is the moon around the zodiac through the 28 places of what we're calling the lunar zodiac, which you may be more familiar with being called the 28 lunar mansions. But if you've listened to some of our other material, we're trying to kind of pull back further from just the traditional mansion material and look at other factors. And so we're just kind of talking about the 28 shapes or the 28 places, and seeing what else feeds into it. And part of that work is going to be what we're going to try today, which is every time the moon comes around to what would be the first lunar mansion in the Picatrix, being the vernal equinox and 0 degrees Aries, and we base most of our perspective around the Greek magical papyri list from the Prayer to Mene, which lists 21 animals and then 7 cult objects of Hecate. And so the first place or shape would be ox. And so every month when the moon comes around to ox, we're going to look ahead for that stretch of 28 days. And and within that cycle, you'll always get a new moon and a full moon, and then perhaps sometimes other occurrences such as eclipses and anything interesting we see that occurs within the lunar zodiac we'll take note of. And so it's kind of like a monthly forecast, but just looking at stuff from a lunar perspective and starting to see if what kind of flows through and what comes out of that. So we'll look at what shape or place the new moon's in, what shape or place the full moon's in, and then so on, and kind of discuss those. But this time around, it's sort of a special occurrence. And as it's the first new moon after the vernal equinox, after spring equinox, so it occurs in Aries. And so it's almost like a soul lunar new year for the lunar zodiacal perspective. Since very ancient times, cultures across many geographies would look at how the sun and the moon in their cycles kind of occurred in tandem, it's like similar to even how the Catholic calendar operates, or how we get Chinese New Year, things like this. Is we're looking at the spring equinox and then the first new moon that occurs after it. And so happy Lunar New Year for us. And there's kind of phenomenon that we noticed right off the bat that occurred there, as this year it happens around 21, 22 degrees of Aries, which puts it in the shape of vulture in the Greek magical papyri. But when we looked, it kind of went back and forth over each year. Would be a few degrees ahead or a few degrees behind. And it kind of went back and forth between the first lunar mansion and the second lunar mansion for several years in a row. So for us, that would be ox, vulture, ox, vulture, ox, vulture. And then it kind of at one point stuck 2 times in vulture, I think, but on either end of the sign. So just kind of a little kind of tick-tock phenomenon that maybe we might find more about later, but just a peculiarity of of where the new moon lands, a few degrees ahead or a few degrees behind, like every year.
So maybe we can say what degrees we find vulture in. Let me see. I don't have them here in front of me, but
I do. You mean of the mansion itself?
Yeah, just for reference.
Yeah, it begins at 12 degrees and 51 minutes of Aries, and it extends until 25 degrees and 42 minutes of Aries. So that's
the second place, and we call it vulture. Just for reference.
Yeah, and that's good that you mentioned that too, because for people that don't know, each of the what we call the lunar mansions, or we're calling the lunar shapes, are 12 degrees and 51 minutes of arc. So it being the second mansion or the second place, it starts at 12 degrees and 51 minutes, and then each of the 28 of the tropical zodiac are 12 degrees and 51 minutes, and because that's how 360 is split into 28.
And the new moon in Aries this year falls in the second lunar mansion, or the second place, which is called vulture. And we want to talk a little bit about that today, just how symbolically what that might represent, because we're really used to hearing about Aries from a tropical solar perspective. But the experience of vulture from a lunar perspective, the experience of the second lunar mansion there is some overlapping theme with Aries, but it's a little bit different in terms of closure. Personally, that's my experience with it. I don't know if you wanted to go over a little bit of the traditional signification, or if you wanted to just go into right away, our perspective of it.
Yeah, I think we should just kind of compare and contrast and mix and match, because interesting things come out. And I guess it's a good time to say also that for people that aren't familiar with our work, what we often see with looking at it as the places or the shapes being lunar rather than solar might fall into how these significations of where the moon is placed affect your dreams, your imagination, creative output, magical practice, these kinds of more subjective layers of stream of consciousness, this part of your experience of life. Because in our work, we do a lot of automatic writing, automatic drawing, trance work, and how it informs other magical operations, etc., or creativity. And so it's like you pick up on it when you're allowing yourself to immerse in those subjective layers, rather than just kind of delineating tropical aspects for what might pop up or tend to happen in your life.
But any type of astrology, you kind of have to hold a lot of different layers together in your mind or in your body, because it's not just one definition.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so in the Picatrix, this would be the second mansion, Al Butain, and which is which
the
means
little belly.
Yeah, the little belly. The image that they mention is a crowned king, which I'll go into a little bit later, which is interesting to come back to. But the election is for digging wells or streams, for finding treasure, for planting crops, and as very common in the Picatrix stuff, like destroying buildings, setting people against one another, to firm incarceration. The talisman is for the removal of anger, and you use white wax and mastic. You form the crown of a king. There we have that from the image of the crowned king again, and use lingam aloes as incense, and the spirit or angel they say to call on is Enneadil. And of course, as we said, for the Greek magical papyri, the animal is vulture. And then we also, if you've heard us talk before, we also compare the spirits of the grimoire, the Grimorium Verum, which would be the second spirit mentioned in the chronological list, which is Satanakya, which is the first deputy of Lucifer, who, if you look at the seal or sigil of how you call upon this spirit, it looks like this head, or this kind of like horned bird, or kind of like a insect with horns, which I'll talk more about soon. But do you want to kind of say what comes through for you for Vulture?
Yeah, I mean, we've been trading notes on this place for a year and a half, about, or maybe a little bit more. And I think the overlapping theme for both of us, there was this sort of there was a big landscape, a sort of topographic landscape, which is really interesting because it's initiating something in a way. So that's the similarity with Aries. I find like you can see like a whole map of something, you know, but it's, for me, often it's very deserted. There's nothing fertile about that land. It's very dry. If you imagine where Vulture resides, it's always like super high altitude, super like harsh, dry landscape. And that comes through all the time. I always have mountain, I always have like a huge image of a landscape, and then I always have the bird with hooks and stuff, which reminds me of the seal too. It's like I have the vulture, but often the vulture's wing has hooks on it, and it's always eating flesh, so it's just like typical vulture imagery. But the interesting thing for me in terms of like comparing it to where it is in the like tropical zodiac is that when we talk of Aries, we think of initiating things. So there's something beginning, you know, and the first new moon of the year in the spring, like plant your seeds, you know, like set your intention and stuff like that. But this place for me is really about composting, like recycling the old, because you can't really begin until you recycle the old. And that's sort of like a deeper layer of once you start separating, like, is it just Aries? No, it's not just Aries. Like this place has to do a lot more with like, yeah, you have to like eat the old, you have to eat what is decaying first. You have to process that. Even though I can see the whole map of the territory and where I'm going in the path ahead, you know, you're kind of like there chewing like decaying form first. That's sort of my experience of it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that's part of how it's the moon, you know, when we talk about like the significations of the moon, it's like generation and corruption, and like waxing and waning, and then we're like, well, it's the moon, it's the most cyclical. And so if the moon is all the planets go through their synodic cycles, but if the moon is known for being most cyclical, then these 28 shapes would probably express cycles and cycles within cycles. And especially at this point where it's so close to the beginning, it's the second shape or the second mansion. And even when we look at the Picatrix or the nakshatras, or for the Chinese mentions, you know, like the second mention is the little belly, the third is the many little ones, etc. It's not just describing the 12 signs of the tropical zodiac split into like other parts. It's describing like other asterisms, and the Picatrix may be looking more at the stellar layer, where we think that the Greek magical papyri might be looking more at kind of this light darkness, like pacing of things, like how the year moves, how day and night like move, how like eclipses and all that stuff is like within each other. But we can kind of see, as you know, so I'm saying it's like it's not just the 12 sign layer, it's not really Aries that it's describing. But when we come back to the beginning of this repetition of the cycle from the 28th place to the first place, and we get ox as just kind of a real initiation. And if it's like from the the Grimorium Verum list, if that's Lucifer, and Lucifer is the first place, and it's like the highest up in that, or highest up in that sublunar hierarchy, like the most prominent, that pushes and compels everything else, then we get the next spirit that follows Lucifer in Vulture. That there's this real initiation and this kind of beginningness that this like cynosure, like this like kind of like all eyes look to this beginning point with ox, and then what follows it. And when we've looked into like really ancient iconography, pre-Indo-European stuff you find on pottery or on cave walls and old dwellings and stuff, there seems to be this kind of like ox turning into vulture, turning into bull, turning into beetles, kind of thing present that points to that the beginning of this list is very old and talking about that regeneration and like these like different ideas of overlapping regeneration with yeah, it's like the after that initial kind of like fertility, you know, like the ox being the like one fertility symbol, what emerges from the eastern horizon betwixt the horns. And you can almost see that in the glyph of Aries itself, maybe being like that bifurcating of the eastern horizon, being a remembrance in that. But that's like this kind of moment of inception and moment of conception possibly, and then after conception occurs, like the soul needs a body if things become reanimated, and you have the vulture searching the sky from above, which in life, you know, the vulture is flying around looking in the landscape for a corpse, you know, it's looking for something to eat. And so it's almost like this parallel of the vulture trying to fly around and finding the recently deceased, you know, to re-inhabit a soul into a physical form.
I really like the nakshatra. I don't know if I think there's different system, but in the one that Freedom Cole uses in his book, he attributes Yama to vulture, or to the second lunar mention, which I thought was really fitting with everything that we've come across, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yama being like basically what, like the ruler of death.
Yeah, the god of death. Yeah.
And that's like one of the interesting connection with the nakshatras that I thought was really spot on. It's almost like this really, it's like this moment of inception in destruction, you know?
Yeah, totally. And if it's like a god of death, and this is like a really high up spirit, like the closest to Lucifer, it's like it has some power. It's not like an underling, you know, and it's a carrion bird, which, you know, there's the short, you know, thought to be in the ancient world, like carrion birds were seen to be sort of the shortest link between life and death, you know, and being kind of like almost, some people conflate angels, like how we see angels as these winged creatures that ready for battle, as almost being like the way ancients saw carrion birds, and birds of prey. But wait, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in Yama, it's interesting because he often rides a buffalo, and if you look in the order of dimension, it's ox, vulture, and then it's bull. And Yama is depicted riding a buffalo, and it's just interesting that he rolls over the second mention, and he's kind of like riding the animals that stands between, like, you know, ox and bull.
Yeah, totally. Like, and that might even be like how we were saying, we found these cycles of like ox, vulture, bull, beetle, falcon, like in old old European, pre-Indo-European iconography. And so there would be this kind of probably shared symbolism before it got the overlay of Indo-Europeanism, before the Aryans came into India, or before the fall of Troy, you know, stuff like that, where we get this different sky culture coming in, because we do see, you know, like the vulture turning into the bull, and the bull being related to the female reproductive system, like the bull's skull resembling like
honestly, Aries looks like that to me too, but we can we can talk about that later.
Yeah, but that's why we get like ox and then bull on the other side of vulture. They're this like similar creatures.
But so like the interesting thing to consider is like, okay, we find these iconography that are kind of parallel to the lunar places that we're using, the animal system that we're using. So what does that mean? You know, it's not a learned thing. It's not something that we have access through books. We have access through these imagery that seems to follow each other through sort of just knowing, you know. It's not something that like we're like, oh, A, B, C, like
Yeah.
Because now we're making this comparison, you know. It seems like, oh, okay, you know, Yama rides a bull, Yama rules over the second mansion, and then there's bull. But like, what does it mean sort of in the bigger and it kind of relates to what we do. What we do is really trying to pull out the places and the spirits that reside there and the imagery. And we're doing this through research, but we're also doing this through vision work. So there's something that is eternally there, you know.
Yeah.
I just wanted to specify because, you know, we're spewing a lot of like sort
Like
of textual evidence
and stuff.
but it's also something that like anybody can have access to and will sort of come across if they start engaging with the more subjective experience of the places. Is that there's this kind of universal there's a universal symbolism residing there.
Yeah, that's why we're seeing it like cross cultures and cross time, and how we see it in our own work, like how we're talking about like you know, you as well, but the first time I drew Vulture just in like a trance state, I drew like almost like a topographical map from a bird's eye view with like a body laying in it, you know. So I saw that kind of vulture looking for that corpse kind of motif. And then even if you look at like what they might have been referring to in the Greek magical papyri outside of like a remembrance cross cultures or whatever, like there's also like the pre-dynastic Egyptian vulture goddess is named Nekbet, and she was the patroness of the upper Egyptian region, and she represented sort of like pharaohic sovereignty over the land, like how the pharaoh, and as always in Egyptian stuff, the pharaoh is also like the pharaoh in death as in life. So this kind of like this sovereignty over the land, and then these visions of the land from above, and this kind of like, you know, this reanimating a corpse idea is like very like Osiris. And yeah, these like we'll see these things in vision and in our automatic drawing and writing work, and then you'll just, as you go around and look at like, oh well, what could this mean? How did the Egyptians also see vulture? And it's just like ting ting ting, like you just keep running into these shared ideas of forms and gestures and concepts, and even down to like just like the formations too, like the way the stuff you draw, even if on a really simple level, like how Elodie was saying, like you'll end up drawing stuff with like hook shapes, and then you see that in the Grimoire Verum sigil, you know, like there are these like primary just these primary expressions like buried in there that express itself every time the moon comes through.
And so like the reason we brought this up was also to kind of explore what this might mean as the first new moon of the year, that it's taking place here. I don't know if you wanted to discuss that a little bit or jump to that, because I think, you know, just to make it a little bit more engaging also, like,
yeah, totally. The one last thing I wanted to point out with Vulture though is just to wrap it back around to the Picatrix, is like the how it's like the little belly, you know, and like what do these types of carrion animals often do first is just like pierce into the belly to eat the entrails, you know. Like there's this sort of like you can like wrap it all the way back around to like the conventional,
I think the little,
you know,
the little belly isn't that anchored in asterism, I think.
Yeah, totally.
It's like a place in the, I can't even remember which stars
like
are there,
because the Arabic constellations.
Yeah. Yeah, well, every time I've done these painting of these places, which we're at like maybe 20 rounds now each month, so maybe 20 months, I always get flesh, and I always kind of taste rotten flesh in my mouth.
Yeah.
And if I don't get the strong vulture sort of signification, I get the topographic like landscape map, which I think they go hand in hand. Like I was saying earlier, it's like you're getting a new perspective, you're getting like a sort of huge image of something, but then something has to be recycled too before you can continue on your journey. And that's how I see this new moon this year. Anyway, that's my personal process right now, and that's how I'm using it. But it's really something like, well, so the new moon in Aries every year is either going to happen in the Ox or Vulture. So this year it's happening in Vulture. If we look just a little bit further down this month, and I'm jumping back to tropical astrology, Pluto stations retrograde. And, you know, I'm not making a direct association with Pluto and Vulture here, but there's something about composting and something decaying and something dying, and we can see it like on a mundane level. It's happening in a really bigger sense, but you know, in your personal life, how is this applying? Like, what is in the process of being composted, you know? Because if we read astrology blog or on Instagram, people are going to be like, the new moon in Aries, time to plant your seeds for the year ahead. Like, there's a lot of momentum, there's a lot of fire and energy. Like, what is it that you want to initiate? And yeah, I think that's a lot of, you know, this time of year. But I think just if we dig a little bit deeper and look that it's in Vulture, and what does it mean when you start something new? What does rebirth means, you know? Yeah, sometimes it's just like, boom, you're coming, something new kind of begins, but new beginnings also like totally requires like composting and digesting of the old. That's sort of how I'm seeing this new moon.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I mean about that shortest link between life and death, that like the you know, the as a scavenger type animal, like a carrion bird, like the vulture is directly getting nourishment from something that recently died, you know. And you know, when you're saying like planting your seed, it's Aries, it's the time of initiation, but you still need like potting soil, you know, that has composted material in it, even though it's like, it's not like the larger narrative yet of like the fields and the big regenerative cycle. It's just like it could be happening in like a little greenhouse with just like some potting soil and a seed and just that germination point. But it still requires like that composted material, even if it's just like sort of in short form, like rather than like a big compost metaphor. But
yeah, that's really pretty. I'm thinking something a little bit more gory, like, you know,
yeah,
like
totally.
chewing on like organs that will sustain you later, but like it's kind of like organs from an old system that is no longer working, it's dead, but you still have to like chew on and digest it. You know?
Yeah, everything that happens in like the lunar layer is like more visceral. It's sort of, instead of the thing that happens like in your life, it's something that happens like in your nightmares, you know.
But I'm thinking like right now for this year, like if you look at where the system is at, like,
oh totally,
that's what I meant. Like it's like we still have to chew on this, like all around, like a lot of decaying structure and institution, and we still have to pass through. And Aries is really impatient and wants things to happen now and like get started on new things, but we still have to chew on all of these excuse my language, but these like decaying.
No,
like
I think that's okay. I think I said it for explicit, you know.
Explicit.
Yeah.
Also in French we say fuck and it's not like a big deal. So that's the difference with the English world. But yeah, I think like I was talking just on a mundane level, this new moon this year, considering it's in Vulture, like what kind of decaying systems are we chewing on, and that we still have to chew on for some time to sustain ourselves, but it's also like dead, you know?
Yeah, and I think we talked about, if this is like the first new moon of the year, like is it representative of like you know, like as if an Aries ingress chart like representative of the entire year, or would it be more appropriate, especially in the lunar zodiacal system that we're looking at, where, you know, we're very observant of solstices and equinoxes, like and that like the 28 places break down into 4 sevens, you know, between those solstice and equinox points? Would it be like a new moon that kind of casts its expression, it casts its light across, or its dark moment over the seasonal quarter? So just like from spring to summer solstice, being kind of like an overarching character. And like you're saying, we can get ox or vulture. So this time we get vulture, so it's more that nature you're talking about kind of like, you know, chewing into the deceased matter to get sustenance out of, and get energy out of, like to be a animated being. But you pointed out that like right around this time we get Pluto stationing, and that might not be happening in just this like mostly lunar observant like system of consideration, but like we look at anything in astrology kind of like rules of three or echoes or whatever. Like if you like see it happening in the transits, you see it happening in the progress chart, you see it happening in the solar return, etc., then you know that this is going to resonate with the client or the event or whatever. That in this instance we're like, okay, it's a vulture, it's a vulture season, you know, in this year, it's a vulture season, and what else is happening around it? And we get Pluto stationing, and you're like, okay, well now some themes are starting to take place, and that might be significant. And then we get the other lunation like also being Mars ruled, and then we get this lunation being aspected to Mars, and that lunation also being aspected to Mars. So we get kind of this like critical and kind of like, it's like critical and crucial and severe. So there's like some severity there that also kind of resembles like the type of metaphors and archetypes that we surround vultures with. You know, if we were going to like make an image and it's like vultures and the type of stuff we see around vultures, that has a certain attitude, you know?
Well, yeah, it's funny because Mars is also a planet of action and destruction. So, you know, and it's really this season particularly, I'm thinking about it this way with the new moon, or sorry, with the full moon in Scorpio, like at the end of the month also, which is, you know, it's Scorpio season, and we will get more into like the lunar place for the full moon, but it's also more about endings and dissolution in this very martial initiatory time. So what could that potentially mean? I mean, like on a smaller scale, because we know on a big scale we're in a like very transitional time. This time of year is also very transitional every year, but now it's even more so. And there's a lot of Mars. Mars is supportive to the new moon and supportive to the full moon. So it's almost like you have to stay in action, in this action of deconstruction, something like that.
Yeah, it's like the first action being in this vulture mode of kind of like you said, like what would be the first action would be, you know, to initiate this season is to scan the world around you, like this topographical perspective, this bird's eye view topography, like scan your landscape for what there is that's like dead or destroyed or broken down or not working, for being cannibalized and kind of reworked, you know.
Yummy.
Yummy. Yeah, and it might be gross, but like it's, you sort of have to, it's almost like a gory sadhus, like you kind of have to, like in that tantric way, like that like extreme end of tantra, like you kind of have to like you have to eat the meat, you have to eat the forbidden things like the fish and the meat and the grains, but take it to the point of like, you know, they're like, even the smell of feces shouldn't disgust you, and like you have to like dive deep into the wound and sort of just like revel in it, just kind of like not with transgression, but just pull away, go beyond like your disgusts and just start like enjoying the process of getting like deeply gross to regenerate things.
Yeah, there's definitely something about regeneration. Obviously I like that word for now. Because we're so action oriented and we're so caught up in productivity. Like everybody, it's over talked about, like people are always talking about, you know, that we're caught up in overproductivity and consumerism and stuff. But I feel like Aries season is like, okay, you know, there's something very, like, we're really fired up. It gets nicer outside. We have all these plans. We want to make gardens. We want to do this. We have plans for the summer. It's still like, there's still a lot of momentum, and, you know, that's what Mars represents. But I think also it's like, if you blindly just like go full speed ahead, you're not necessarily like soaking up and taking the moment and nourishing like yourself truly with the moment. So it's like, I don't know, like the way I'm using it right now in my life, I'm just like, I'm getting rid of like so much stuff. And I like, it's also making me consider like where I spend my money, and like why do I have so much stuff? And also like, what does it mean in a year from now when supply and demand is even like less because of lockdowns and stuff? Like, will all of these precious objects that I have that are like super vintage, will they be worth more? Will they be harder to find? What does it mean? Do I need to hold on to this? That's sort of how I'm doing my Aries season, just because it's my 6th house or whatever. But that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, it's interesting as you talk about like personal experience. Like I have to put a new roof on right now, so the past few days have been like on the roof, like on the ridge of the house, like, and it's that same thing. Like I live in the north, so it's like the snow is recently receded, and I can see all the gross stuff that like got melted and messed up over the course of the winter, like old piles of lumber with like like deteriorating tarps and things like that. But I'm up above looking at the whole landscape, almost like in this total vulture mode, like looking from the high up bird's eye view at these kind of like corpses that I left around, that I'm like, oh yeah, I got to do something with that. I got to get rid of that. I got to.
And you're also redoing your roof, so you're not building something new. You're
right,
like,
totally.
you're recycling, or not recycling necessarily, but yeah.
And I'm pulling off like layers and seeing like gross stuff underneath and being like, oh fuck, you know.
Yeah, we're kind of forced right now to be in this kind of mode of like, how do you say? It's less like, because of Jupiter's situation probably this year and stuff, like it's less like long term. It's more like, okay, I'm circling around. How do you say in English when a plane just like circles before it lands? Like when it just like hovers over around. Yeah. So we're hovering over our life, constantly kind of circling over and analyzing it and kind of like perfecting it, because we're kind of stuck in one place, you know, in a lot of ways. So it's like we're refining what we have. We're kind of like sharpening our environment that way. Like a lot of people are kind of stuck in this holding pattern. And I guess, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I was just having this image of like circling over your life.
Yeah, the vulture. When you see a vulture flying around and you see it circling, maybe above a spot that's like through the woods from where you're driving down the road or whatever, and you're like, oh, there's got to be something dead down below there. Or you see multiple vultures, you're like, oh, there's got to be something over there that they're interested in and they're processing. But I think it's worth mentioning because it does like connect through multiple layers, that like, you know, the Grimorium Verum spirit that would fall here, being Satanakya, is like a high up spirit that has a bunch of spirits underneath it. Then the image from the Picatrix is the crowned king. And then as I was saying, like the where is it here? The Egyptian goddess, the vulture goddess, is the patroness of the pharaoh's sovereignty over the land. And so there's this thing of sovereignty across like and crown and rulership. And Nekbet ruled side by side with the cobra deity Wadjet, who ruled the Lower Egypt region, and they were referred to as the Two Ladies. But there is a cobra in the lunar, the Greek magical papyri list. It's asp, but they would have called a cobra an asp at that point. And then when you go down and look at that on the list, and the correspondence is there, also you get the Grimorium spirit, the Grimorium Verum spirit, Musician, who has the power over lords and over state affairs and the power over aristocracy. And so that's just interesting, that connection, but just in general, and that maybe there could be this connection between that part of the lunar zodiac and this part of the lunar zodiac that is kind of like reflected in how the Egyptians looked at those animals, but also just that, like, across all that stuff, there's this idea of sovereignty and rulership and ruling over things. So it's like we're doing the action of a vulture, like the viscerality of like kind of eating death and turning it into animating power within yourself. But there's also something about like being able to be like above and over things, and like that asp, when you look at the correspondences of what that might relate to, we came back over and over to sort of the like the serpent around the egg and those kinds of images, and also to do with like beginning and generation and the creation of the world in a totally different way, like in like kind of another cycle within the larger cycle.
That's later down the road.
Yeah,
maybe we'll talk about it in a couple of months.
Yeah, totally. Like I don't want to go into that, but it's just interesting to see it all there and all link up. And
also, just a small anecdote, I was just looking through the drawings of the last several months, and there's always dice or playing cards, and it makes me think that like you kind of have to take a gamble too when it's like, what are you chewing on? Like, we always have to take a gamble in life, but this place here is so much more decisive because it's martial. And I have, in most of my images, I have dices or playing cards, and there's kind of something about taking a gamble, and what are you taking a gamble on or something. Just like, yeah, I'm not drawing conclusion on it, it's just a commentary.
Well, it's funny because loaded in playing card decks are also kings and royalty. Like there's something always, like if you want to be the ruler of your life, like you have to take a gamble and eat something disgusting to reprocess it.
But like, we're saying for real, like, I don't know, sometimes
no, we're joking, but we're also serious,
because sometimes with astrology it's like, I don't know, like we're just more metaphorical. We're just like, okay, my intention now is to not eat dairy products starting with this new moon, which is like very tame version. But I'm like, I was talking about like a bigger gamble, like at some point, like, especially, okay, I'm transgressing here, but this new moon is sextile with Mars in Gemini. Mars in Gemini rules this new moon. There's a lot, and it's in mutual reception with Mercury in Aries. There's a lot of social media, internet communication stuff kind of overlapping or somehow with this, like information, like, and I'm kind of, how do you say in English? Digressing from like digressing from the place. But the way I've been thinking about it is like, what information are you chewing on, ingesting? I'm thinking about doing like social media detox, like literally, and I'm just like kind of, I'm like having this dialogue with myself, like, are you courageous enough? Can you actually do this? I dare you to do this. And it's like a huge move because it means like potential income loss, and like it's like a structure that I've built for myself to make money. But it's like I'm kind of also at that point, like a lot of people, we need to reinvent the forums, and social media puts us in a lull of like a trance where we're kind of numb and life keeps going and we're running after our own time, and time passes and then we're like, life is passing by. So when you were saying like, when I was saying also like, this is like in a real way, like what is ready to become posted, it's like kind of daring, it's like,
yeah, totally.
For
It's that gamble aspect. Like you could eat this and it could make you sick, or you could eat this and and you could like sustain yourself. Like my riffing off of what you were just saying, like I noticed like my mom was going to get my dad a new phone, and then the phone that he has now is a flip phone that they've kept going since like, oh, I don't even know, since
2007.
or much earlier, you know, like 2002 or something. And I was like, oh, interesting. So then that phone will be free. And I was like, I should just switch to that phone. But that's sort of like, it's like this dead technology, you know? It's
Yeah.
like, I was like, oh, maybe I should consume that corpse, you know?
But it's also for a bigger thing. It's like in a bigger frame of mind, is that you want to be more productive in your life, you know?
Yeah, totally. Because I'm like, yeah, this is like you're saying, like the social media or whatever is like making me sick. So maybe I should just like eat this other thing, recycle this other thing that I've seen as I'm like scanning over the landscape, you know.
Well, if we go back to Mars, and in like I associate Mars with independence and at free agency, and that's one thing you don't have when you engage with social media. You're being rewired, literally your brain is being rewired, you know.
Yeah.
And Mars is in Gemini for this lunation or whatever, for this new moon. So for me, that's like something that's like hanging over my head, like majorly. I'm just like, I don't want to waste my time on this. There's the illusion of productivity. It's really nice to connect with a million people, but where's my time going? And life is going by, and I might die in 5 years, and like I don't want to spend my life on social media. I want to exist.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, even like with like consuming, scanning the landscape and seeing there's like, oh, there's this corpse of this old flip phone, maybe I should consume that. The reason for doing that, like you're saying, is to gain like sovereignty over my life again.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Which comes back to the stuff we see reflected across like the correspondences. But maybe we should switch to
yeah, the full moon. Let's talk about the full moon. Just like, whoops. I'm just looking at the notes here. Also, the new moon is I guess most people know this, but the new moon is the darkest time of the month. So it's like the incoming forms are not visible, you know. It's like a very dark time. And I just wanted to mention this because we do work with Hecate, and she rules over the new moon.
Yeah, and the new moon is on the 11th of April, and then the full moon is going to be on the 27th of April.
So let's jump into the full moon.
And that'll be at 7 degrees. I think 7 degrees in about 5 minutes, or 7 degrees in 7 minutes.
7:06.
7:06. Nice. Okay, not 5 or 7, 6. Yeah, 7:06. Yeah, we're like flying around it like vultures, zeroing in on it. But 7 degrees and 6 minutes of Scorpio, which puts it into the within the Greek magical papyri, that puts it into Lion. And let me just look here.
And that's on the late on the 26th on the East Coast, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
26th of April.
Right. So in the evening. But then so that'll be in Lion for the Greek magical papyri, and which this is really weird because all the stuff I was just saying about Vulture and how Vulture, you know, connects to the Egyptian myths, and what, you know, the image and the Picatrix for Vulture is a crowned king, and then we see the sovereignty over the land, and then the connection with Asp, and again like sovereignty, and then in the Picatrix for Lion for the 17th lunar mansion, which is al Iklil, means the crown. So again, we get like 2 in a row. But like we were saying, you're either going to get
sovereignty.
Yeah, sovereignty and crowns. And so you're either going to get every year at this time, you're going to get either a new moon in Ox, which, you know, especially if you think in the Grimorium Verum list, that's basically the ultimate emperor of all the spirits, and this beginning and this sovereignty, or you're going to get it in Vulture. And either way, you're going to get then the full moon's always going to be somewhere across the zodiac from that. So again, you get this other kind of crown.
So just to specify, Lion, which is like the 17 lunar mention, is between 25 degrees and 42 minutes or 42 seconds, sorry, of Libra, and 8 degrees and 34 of Scorpio. So between 25 Libra and 8 Scorpio, that's Lion or lunar mention 17, and that's where the full moon is this month. The interesting thing, as some of you may already know, is that Mars will have moved out of Gemini. Mars in Gemini rules the new moon in Aries, and Mars in Cancer is going to rule over this full moon. So we have like a lot of water incoming, still martial, but more watery. And what does that mean? You know, water, when we talk about water, probably a little bit more emo.
Yeah. Well, when I wrote like the regular tropical astrology forecast, like for the month of April, I noticed that it was like all this stuff in air and fire, and then in the second half of the month or the end of the month, all this stuff in earth and water. So it's kind of like very diurnal and then very nocturnal.
Yeah, so lion, lion signification is definitely not lion like Leo in the tropical zodiac. We're talking about something completely different here. Lion mention comes after which mention? Sorry,
it's like between cat and leopard. So it's like in that whole series that's all feline, but it begins with baboon. At the the autumn equinox degree, 0 degrees Libra, and then so you get this other we're getting like the full moon express itself in that quadrant of the seasonal cycle, whereas the new moon's expressing itself in the vernal, so we get the vernal and the autumnal kind of expressing themselves like on either side of a mirror. And there's something about that series with like baboon being sort of like it's a primate, so it kind of is man and beast, and then cat, if you look at the way the Egyptians like dealt with cats, they would be buried with them,
which is like
mummified.
12 to 25 Libra, just to specify.
Yeah. And then they would let cats eat from the dishes, and cats lived in the house. So the domesticity of cats being another like man and beast combo. And then it's interesting, we get the crown with lion, as lion might relate to Sekhmet, the lion deity in the Egyptian material, which lorded over and protected the pharaoh after death, and sort of was like a protector of the pharaoh in life or death. So would especially be a protector of the pharaoh in battle. And there's like a myth of Sekhmet being while the battle's raging, Sekhmet is like ripping stuff up and destroying the enemy, and when the battle is over, can't get out of that bloodthirsty mode, and is still just like killing everyone, and it's this big sort of like comic book cartoon like blood spray. And then to get because she's like trying to just like make this creative force, this protective force around the pharaoh and the pharaoh nest, and
Sekhmet is
Sekhmet, and to get Sekhmet to calm down, they mixed a bunch of, some say rust with beer, because the Egyptians drank beer, and some say ochre with beer, and so it was like blood red, and it was a time of year that, because of like, I think it was like certain shells in the rivers, like in the Nile, would the river would run kind of reddish. And
so that's the end of October, beginning of November.
Yeah. And it was also a time of so the story goes that Sekhmet drank all the beer because she thought it was blood, and became so drunk she fell asleep. And so that saved the day. She stopped raging after, like, in this kind of like prolonged after battle like episode. But then also every year around that time when the river would run red and they'd remember that myth and that event, people would drink a ton of beer to reenact it. And it would be sort of this bacchanal. And you see like, it's like lion, then leopard, and leopard being the most common vehicle for Dionysus. And sometimes you'd actually see depictions of Dionysus on a lion as well.
And it's usually the time of the month where I get drunk.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Through all of our note taking, we've noticed like leopard is often where you end up going overboard, and kind of get drinking to the point of excess or blacking out but I've noticed it can happen in lion or leopard, and the times where I just sort of like end up missing a mention because I'm just like too drunk or too hungover or there are too many things going on, and those elements are also thrown in there, is almost always lion or leopard.
So we're talking about the moon in Scorpio usually.
Yeah, totally. And then the overlay is the moon in Scorpio.
Yeah. Interestingly, this place, I'm just looking here, the Verum attributed this to Mercilde. I don't know how you would say that in English, the spirit that rules over this place, but it rules over transport and teleportation, which, for me in visionary work, when we did lion, it's basically always open mouth of a lion giving onto the space with stars. That's pretty much always how I've seen this place in vision.
I always get very frequently I get ladders there.
Yeah, I got ladders too. There's something about crossing over into something else, and when we think about like more the Egyptian stuff that's filtering through this, like we always see this place as like the rites of mummification that happens. There's a lot of that coming through, but there's really something like, when you see in like a stupid movie, I was gonna say stupid American movie, but I was gonna say stupid movie. But
I think in America we might say like a stupid Hollywood movie rather than an American movie, even though Hollywood is in America,
But like in the 80s or something, like there's like a vortex, and like the children are like playing and they find like a vortex in the woods, and it's just like circling, and they go through it and it's like vroop, and then they just like end up somewhere else completely. That's how I kind of conceptualize lion. There's something really cosmic about it, weirdly enough. It's like very vortexy, void. Yeah, but it's almost like an invitation. It's like, for me anyway, like the way I experience it always is like, it's a very nice place. It's very golden. It's like very inviting, but you don't really know where you're going.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting that the Grimorium Verum spirit mentions transport and teleportation. And then the Picatrix mentions safe travel by water, which is like, back then or now even like, but back then, navigating by sail and by star, like you'd go out in the water and you'd be like, that was the final frontier, like there was like, you were nowhere. And then, and hopefully you'd get to where you were going from there.
And you need a lot of courage to be like, okay, I'm going on this boat on this place. We're going to go discover the North Passage or something like.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting seeing ladders too, because the image from the Picatrix is a monkey holding its head above its shoulders. So kind of moving up into another realm, or kind of like the body's in one realm, the head's in another realm. Then, you can syncretize, or it is syncretized, the issue of Kumbanda with the spirits of the Grimorium Verum. And that issue is issue of 7 crosses. So it's interesting to think about the formation of a ladder, and then the rungs of the ladder going up, the horizontals and the verticals. I never thought of that before, and then mummification, like putting beings in tombs and going through their organs and pulling all that out and preserving things and preparing things for that journey, you know, because that was the idea of like in Egypt, you would your part of your soul would get in the boat when you die and head out across the water to the other world, you know.
And so the full moon culminates here on the same day that Pluto, or like it depends where you live, but Pluto stations retrograde just like a few hours later. There's really a huge theme of transition here, because even if you just think of a full moon in Scorpio, there's something like a full moon usually is a time where everything is lit up in the forest or in the night, so you can really see clearly as much as the lunar landscape allows you to see. But there's could be like full light on something that is really transitioning, something, you know. I see this place as a place of transition. It's not like we think of Scorpio as like a really fixed place, you know. It's like a place of, yeah, I don't know. I think of Scorpio as very fixed. So when you die, it's actually really painful because it's like ripping you apart. You know, yeah, I think like the fixity. So when we talk of fixed signs, it's the middle of a season, and Scorpio's the middle of fall. So it's still like, it's when everything is dying around, but it's also very fixed. And I think that's why transition is more difficult when we talk about Scorpio, because yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just if you're gonna keep going at that point, keep going.
I was just gonna say, because it's like we're not talking about a small transition, we're talking about bigger transition, so it's more painful because they're more fixated.
There's the transition makes sense with like transport and teleportation, and like how you're saying you see in the trance work and stuff, Lion as with like portals and everything, and but you see in the Picatrix, it says a safe travel by water. It says in for the talisman in the Picatrix, it's so that thieves don't enter and plunder your house. So again, you get safe, and then you get some protection from being plundered, and then the details on that say to use, you know, monkey hair and female mouse hair and wrap it in monkey skin and bury it in the house, because that's what you're trying to protect. And then with the Kimbanda issue, like 7 crosses and crosses often being like protective as well. That there's something about transition, but there seems to be something about like being and then and the lion Sekhmet protects the pharaoh. Like it keeps the pharaoh safe in the afterlife. So there's something about like protecting, and then again, like it's like Akil al-Ilkhlil, the crown, and then that protecting of the pharaoh, and how we said before, like that's sovereignty, and this could be sovereignty over your life, and so like protecting the sovereignty over your life and or let's call it agency, like protecting your agency as you transport and teleport through some sort of transition to another state of being, you know.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, like this, yeah, because this full moon is like, I think it's majorly transitional personally, just like on the verge of eclipse season, on the verge of Jupiter entering Pisces,
with Mars entering Cancer, where what Mars does in Cancer is like sort of, it's like Rambo protecting the babies, you know.
And maybe there'll be like this experience of just like,
speaking of American movies,
maybe there will be this experience of like holding on to something really tightly, in a transition space, especially that Uranus is going to be conjunct the sun, and opposing that full moon. It's
when we look at like the tropical transits in general, there, like Uranus is heavily involved.
And so there's I personally imagine, it's like if you set yourself up for the full moon, you're kind of like, anything goes. I'm just gonna walk towards the portal now.
Well, I was thinking too about like when it's talking about the thieves plundering the house and burying it around the house, and then in like if that was a time in Egypt of like a serious like bacchanal to celebrate like how this lion goes on a killing spree and gets really dangerous, this bacchanal was likely excessively rowdy, you know, kind of like when you look at like Holi in India, when people like the really colorful holiday, like people go crazy, you know, like you end up like getting your glasses smashed, like pulled off your face and smashed, and people like act really transgressive, like, and there's that kind of you see this like with Saturnalias and things like that, where the social status like in society gets flipped and you're allowed to sort of just like beat your boss up a little bit for one day. So in a time where people are going like totally wild, you might need to protect your house from people plundering it, you know? And that, I don't know, just that element too of with Uranus involved this year, as things get kind of crazy and really start shaking, and spring starts really happening, and people might be out and about more than they have been for the past couple of years, and things start getting wild, like it's like what, as things are changing, life's going through transition, things are getting a lot more active than they might have been before, and you're really experiencing that, you're feeling it in a visceral level, like what things around you do you want to protect. It reminds me of what you were saying too about Vulture being like the element of cards and dice, and it's kind of like, okay, roll the dice, motherfucker, like time to take a chance.
I
Like
just
it's
want to
like,
specify that here in Canada, everything is going under lockdown again. So I
yeah,
just want to
yeah, totally.
specify that.
That's not for
Very,
everywhere.
very tight lockdowns going on. But I was just reading some of the automatic or channeled writing from Lion sorry, I'm just going to find the date, April 8th, 2020. And it says, God stars, space, tomb, sealed but open. There's no way out.
Yeah.
And I could keep reading this, but it's almost like the only way out is by, it's through like really, it's through something, surrendering something.
Mm-hmm.
But the protective aspect is funny that you bring up, because Mars is going to be in Cancer. There's something really, really, there's going to be something really protected, and Uranus is going to be conjunct the Sun, so it's like, I think people are going to get maybe really emotional about protecting something. Could it be their integrity? Could it be their freedom? Some of it probably.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
there's
it's
like,
like
yeah,
magically, it's like the recipe is almost like for the new moon, what do we want to regenerate, or what do we want to like recycle or cannibalize to restore agent to restore that agency and sovereignty over our life. And then for the full moon, like what do we want to protect in our life as we like open a portal, like it's time to like open a portal and move through the unknown, and what do we want to protect as we do it, as kind of like a two-piece thing.
but what we're holding on to might become a lot more obvious with Mars and
Yeah,
Cancer.
totally.
You know, it's a little bit dualistic in that sense. It's like you have to cross over, you're initiating change. We're always initiating change, but this is definitely transitional, especially that the second half of April is a little bit more rocky. So there's might be a lot of stuff that is just under the surface. Now we have all this momentum at the beginning of April, and the new moon, it's like, yeah, I can do this. I can chew on these old bones. Like, I'm doing this. But by the time we get to fixed yin season, Taurus season, and we get to the full moon in Lion, it's like, okay, here's the portal open, but then there's something kind of like graspy, you know,
Yeah.
there's like the hands holding to its mother's skirt, like, no, I don't want to
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, totally, because it becomes more subjective, it's like more feeling oriented and more emotional. Another thing I want to mention that what comes up all the time with me with Lion is kind of like circus world, which might just be kind of like association of just being like the lion, you know, the lion in the circus and the lion tamer. But it comes up so frequently, and it was even coming up in like synchronicities. Like it'd be Lion Mansion, and someone would send me a link to a song about that had like circus themes or carnival themes, and being like, well, it's not just a circus. If this relates back to like a festival, like a bacchanal, there might have been kind of like the ephemera of some sort of like things happening outside, things happening under artificial cover, or different kind of you know what I mean, like carnival aspects that may have developed into like what we think of as they might have even been having like lions involved in some of the festivities, you know. But it's weird because that whole like there's no I'm not pointing to any like direct like be like, and everyone knows that circuses are a portal, but I feel like there's something weird there where it's like non-reality, or it's like not regular reality. It's sort of a like a liminal state, you know, where you're not in everyday functionality.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely. The other thing I forgot, I'm just looking at notes now, is often when I painted the lion's mouth open as like this portal onto space, there's always a pearl on the tongue. And it's almost like you want this pearl, like,
Yeah.
come on, you want this
Yeah,
pearl.
to come and get it. Yeah, come into the mouth.
But if you think of the circus, it's kind of like that too. It's just like the alluring sort of something alluring, you know, there's something kind of alluring, pulling you.
Yeah. Which I think, like, if we're talking about entering the death state, we're also talking about entering the dream state or the imaginal state, where you do sort of need, you need almost like some apotropaic kind of gear to traverse like these, where you're not in control. It's like spirits are in control.
Yeah, exactly.
You're in their territory.
And it could be a lot more fun if you're not trying to like rigidly, fixedly hold on to things, because if you do that, then it's going to be a lot more painful. It's kind of like, okay, I'm game, you know, put me in the cannon, I'm ready.
Yeah, totally.
But like, I remember Austin Coppock like years ago talking about the full moon in Scorpio, or maybe it was a couple of years ago, on the astrology podcast, and he was like, it's really goth, like go to a cemetery and just like get drunk there or something. But if we think about like this year especially, it's like pretty volatile, it's pretty emo, but it's also the opportunity to kind of cross over into that space. So it's, if you imagine yourself like, okay, this is the circus, you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then I'm thinking too about like what you're saying, the alluring pearl, you know, that you have to go into dangerous territory to snatch, and it is Scorpio, so it's like the sign of stealth. And then, you know, the Picatrix talks about thieves, and the Grimoire Verum talks about transportation and teleportation. There is this kind of maybe to get the thing you're trying to get, to pilfer almost, you know, out of the other world, you kind of have to go by night and go as a thief, like almost like the hand of glory, the charm of like you know, you need the hand of a hanged man, which is funny because you're like taking body parts from a corpse. So like going back to Vulture, but like, you have to harvest this hand from a hanged man and make candles of each finger. And then if you enter a house with that as like your candelabra, then no one can see you and you can steal whatever you want. And yeah, there might be something there too, as far as like how this stuff informs our, you know, our magical activity. Like, might be the month to make a hand of glory, even if that's like metaphorical, you know.
In my notes, I put some, the writing speaks often or clearly and consistently about the death process, and even basically the other side. If cat, which is the mentioned before, is the threshold, lion is just the other side of that threshold. So, you know, they're like, with Pluto stationing retrograde, and then this full moon, I don't know, I see something kind of like thresholdy.
Yeah, well, Cat, you know, would have been more like the goddess Bastet, and she was known as like the ointment jar, and the ointment they're talking about is probably like canopic jars of embalming, but was also seen as a healing goddess. So also like kind of actual like balms, you know, like ointments, you know. But then Bastet seems to maybe predate Sekhmet. Like they may have split at some point, because when you look back, you're like, is this a house cat or is this a lion? And maybe I don't know. I'm just speculating this one. I was going to say maybe as house cats became more common, but that's probably not true. That they probably always were common. But at some point they started to distinguish between Bastet and Sekhmet more obviously, and then like Sekhmet was almost like the Bastet for the pharaoh, whereas like the Bastet was, and then so like you're saying, like cat is the threshold and lion is crossing it, because with lion you get the crown and the picatrix. Like with lion it gets real. Like cat sort of introduces the themes, but with lion it's like it goes big. It's like it's the Super Bowl at that point.
You can put your hand in the mouth of a cat, but put your hand in the mouth of a lion.
Yeah, exactly, totally.
Well, it'll be interesting to tune in next month and see how the new moon and the full moon transpire. I'm really curious to see if some of these themes come through. I'm going to take some notes and observe.
Yeah, same. And then, anyone listening, if they want to do that, maybe we could have some place where that dialogue could go. But I guess this is a good time to transition to saying goodbye.
Transition.
Transition. Yeah. Well, this is a good time to go through the lion's mouth and get the pearl so we can say goodbye. But
forever.
Forever. Yeah, totally. This is it. Just bye. Ciao.
Okay, bye.
But we'll be back next month to talk about the lunations. And are we going to be talking at that point already about eclipses too? Yeah.
Yep. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, totally. That's a whole other can of worms. But okay, well, have fun eating corpses. We'll talk to you next time.
Ciao.
Thank you for listening to Liminal Light. You can find me at atavisceral.com, atavisceral.com, where I post forecasts and articles and offer astrological and divinatory services. For more discussions on the moon, go to lunarzodiac.com and sign up for our mailing list to find out about lectures, workshops, dreaming groups, events, appearances, publications, and whatever else. Now that the show is back on track, there's a bunch more guests lined up to discuss what is going on in the sublunar realm. We'll see you there.